Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Bhagavi for the invitation and the support of the Bapu Foundation for coming here. It's a pleasure to be here in India, which is certainly the home of one of the most important civilizations on the planet, and certainly the home of some of the most important spiritual traditions of humanity. So thank you for the opportunity. I think if there were concurrent sessions right now, I probably wouldn't have an audience. I don't think that biological resourcing is a very sexy title, but let me promise you it will be biopsychosocial spiritual resourcing that I'll talk about today. And indeed, the title of my talk is The Biopsychosocial Origins of Ritual Healing, the Shamanic Paradigm in Substance Abuse Rehabilitation. What I want to do in my presentation is to first address this concept of shamanism in cross-cultural perspective and provide a brief overview of the evidence that shamanism was a universal of humanity at a certain point in time, and that by understanding the nature of shamanism, we can begin to understand something about the nature of humans, our biological nature, and the evolutionary origins of our spiritual capacities, as well as the shamanic healing capacity. I'll look a little bit at what I call the shamanic universals, what we find in every culture of humanity. The presence of ritual activities designed to alter consciousness and to put us in touch with the spiritual world. These psychobiological aspects of human nature are very important to recognize because they're still part of our human nature. And I think much of the addiction and trauma and mental illness that humanity experiences today is in part due to an abandonment of those roots, a failure to nourish and create cultural institutions that allow us to access these transformative experiences. So a good part of my talk will focus on the bases of shamanistic therapies, and I will emphasize that the alteration of consciousness is a normal, natural, and yes, necessary part of human health and well-being, and that by understanding the procedures that are used to alter consciousness naturally, we can rediscover a variety of natural therapeutic processes that allow us to deal with problems of trauma and addiction. And so I will outline some of the broad dimensions of shamanic socio-physiological and psychological therapies, and then conclude with some considerations about how we can apply the perspectives of shamanism and the shamanistic paradigm to address problems of substance abuse, giving people normal and natural means of altering their consciousness and altering their self. The classic comparative scholar of religion, Mircea Eliade, characterized the shaman as someone who entered ecstasy in order to communicate with the spirit world on behalf of the community. He noted a cross-cultural pattern of nighttime rituals in which people would sing and dance, accompanied by drumming and storytelling, that would eventually lead the shaman into a state of ecstasy and out-of-body experience, in which the shaman would then experience a departure from the body, a soul flight into the spirit world, where the shaman would encounter the powers of the animals and the shaman's personal animal allies. And these animal allies could be used to heal, to obtain information, and in particular to engage in processes of soul recovery, recovering the souls of people who were traumatized, or extracting objects or entities that had been injected into people's bodies, or removing spirits that caused illness. I engaged in a cross-cultural study of magical religious practitioners to verify the alleged universality of shamans, and using cross-cultural sample and individually assessing the different practitioners in every society, I created a formal database for statistical analysis. And what the statistical analysis showed me was that there were distinctly different types of practitioners in different cultures, but that very similar kinds of practitioners were found around the world. I grouped them under the labels of a shamanistic healer, with a variety of types: shamans, shaman healers, healers and mediums, as well as the priests and sorcerers. So the implications of this research that I provided in the book Shamans, Priests, and Witches is that, yes, The shaman is something real. It's found cross-culturally. It's not just something imagined or a postmodern or New Age idea. It is something real that can be found in the deep history of all cultures. And indeed, here in India, if you go back to Pali, the ancient Sanskrit, you will find the religious distinction between the well-known Brahman and the Sramana, cognate with the concept of shaman found throughout Paleo-Asian cultures. So what my research showed is that these shamans, this more restrictive group, are largely found just in foraging and nomadic societies and disappear with agriculture. But in those foraging societies, the shaman induces ecstasy or an alteration of consciousness characterized by a visionary experience with soul flight, just as Iliad had proposed, and as well as Iliad had noted, not possession. So in the modern world, we don't find shamans as much as we find possessed mediums, the modern descendants of shamanism. The shaman's entry into this world of spiritual powers was through a death and rebirth experience in which they encountered animal powers that became their own personal allies, and they learned to control these animal spirits and even to transform into animals to acquire additional powers and to carry out a variety of activities. The shaman was also known for the ability to find real animals for his people's or her people's food, as well as to engage in malevolent acts, doing sorcery against their enemies. With the shamans are these broader group of shamanistic healers, all related by this notion of the alteration of consciousness through ritual in order to interact with the spirit world to heal. And so what I want to talk about today are these human universals, community rituals to alter consciousness, to enter into spirit relations in order to elicit our own endogenous or natural healing processes. These shamanistic practices involve a variety of biological healing responses. And each of these three aspects, ritual, alteration of consciousness, and the spirit world, can be understood in very biological terms. What we know about ritual is its capacity to elicit our own opioid responses that enhance our social bonding and facilitate a variety of placebo and hypnotic effects. These alterations of consciousness, which I will elaborate on, involve a change in how our brain ordinarily integrates information. It enhances the integration of information from the deep levels of our brain, from the levels that are normally unconscious. And I will propose that we understand the spirit world not only in spiritual terms, but in psychological and social terms. I think that we can appreciate that the concepts of spirits in many cultures are designed to represent our own unconscious psychological structures, and that shamanistic healing concepts such as soul loss and spirit attack and the acts of sorcery which take away our power can also be understood in terms of how our own psychological, emotional structures are manipulated by a variety of beliefs and practices. I have not the time to elaborate upon this here, but I will propose that the foundations of shamanism have deep evolutionary roots, and that practices similar to shamanism can be found even in contemporary chimpanzees, where group chanting provides a tool for ritual coordination, where chimpanzees engage in drumming and yes, dancing, bipedal displays, which are the most important power manifestations in chimpanzee society and which have been analyzed in terms of costly signaling mechanisms, mechanisms which demonstrate to the group the power of a person, an individual. And this powerful individual leads the group against the unknown. The famed primatologist Jane Goodall described the chimpanzee rain dances, in which upright bipedal charges, drumming, vocalizations, challenging the unknown, challenging predatory animals were used as the most important tools for group integration. I think that we can begin to understand the deep evolutionary roots of shamanism in these practices, an understanding of animal rituals as basically tools for communication of our internal states and for producing a kind of social coordination, a social integration, and understanding community rituals as tools for manipulating our social and emotional dynamics. I would characterize this in terms of the management of our reptilian brain and our paleo-mammalian brain, these ancient brain systems that we share with other animals that provide a basis for group emotional coordination, and using tools such as chanting and music and drumming to produce physical, social, and psychological effects upon our health and well-being. We have innate, endogenous human healing responses that are outgrowth of a pretty uniquely human behavior: altruism, caring for others, engaging in behaviors that help other members of our group and our species. We can understand the healing response as an extension of this adaptive capacity to care for others, to protect them, to provision them. And we note this today as a generic human response. Psychiatrists talk about the healer's high, the sense of well-being that we get from helping others. Here I think we see some deep roots of a psychoneural immunological response, where our psychological attitudes, our relationships with others evoke neurological and immunological changes in them as well as ourselves. So the deep psychophysiological dynamics of community healing is an expansion of a mammalian opioid-mediated bonding process. Mammals bond to one another because we have chemicals that make us feel good and that enhance our well-being when we care for others. And these community rituals that we find across the primates are really part of managing this ancient paleo-mammalian brain, where our attachment to others, our social attachment processes, are manipulated and managed, where our emotiomentation, our emotional reasoning and care for others, gives us a basis for caring about others and enhances our sense of self and our identity with others in our group. So community rituals evolved over the course of human evolution. Ritual was part of the environment of evolutionary adaptation. The capacity to participate in ritual enhanced our ability to function in communities and to do something that is almost uniquely human, to integrate unrelated groups into our own groups in order to enhance reproduction and survival. There is a variety of adaptive consequences, advantages from intergroup bonding, not only protection, but acquisition of food and acquisition of mates in order to avoid inbreeding. So humans underwent a variety of evolutionary adaptations in order to enhance our ability to participate in rituals, because rituals expanded our capacity to bond with others. And I think the key to that ritual effect was the effects of the alteration of consciousness in producing an ego dissolution that then enhanced our ability to identify with others, to see the world from their perspective and point of view. These same ritual capacities enhanced our ability to engage in placebo effects. Indeed, placebo responses are a significant part of ritual healing. Not that they are fake or misunderstood, but rather that these kinds of responses are responses in which our beliefs and expectations enable us to produce physiological changes. We also know that the placebo susceptibility enhances this ability to perceive spirits and energies. I think that this is in part a derivation of the dominance-submission dynamic so important in primate societies, where feeling comfortably submissive elicits the placebo response, the relaxation response, as well as opioid-mediated bonding that can enhance a variety of healing responses. The healing response is another hereditary trait that reflects a human susceptibility to enter into a cognized social reality that other people tell us exist. We are able to detach from the world we experience and enter into a world of hope and positive expectation that enhances our capacities to engage physiological responses with imagined realities. Hope is a real effect upon our human biology. And these kinds of capacities linked to dissociation produced by trauma increases our ability to enter into an alternate reality that reboots our system, reorients our paleo-mammalian brain back to its innate opioid-mediated bonding responses. The ritual technologies for altering consciousness that were found in shamanism are still found in cultures today, using fasting, the induction of pain through austerities, at times sleep deprivation or ritualized sleep, in particular the drumming, the chanting, the singing, as well as exhaustive dancing, that all combined produces a similar sensory stimulation and then a withdrawal into a sensory deprived state. Indeed, heat and cold, pain, trauma, fear, all of these induce this kind of internal orientation so characteristic of shamanic alterations of consciousness, as do the psychedelics and other drugs, which I will have the opportunity to speak about in a workshop this afternoon. I will be very brief about the physiology of the shamanic alterations of consciousness. I will just point out that all of these different things produce a very common brain wave response, a slow wave synchronized theta wave response in the 3 to 6 cycle per second range. It's mediated by our serotonergic mechanisms that involve first the paleomammalian brain and reptilian brain. These discharge patterns propagate up to the frontal brain, where they begin to produce interhemispheric synchronization, linking the left brain and the right brain, and ultimately, I would contend, integrating behavior, emotion, and thought. They also induce visionary experiences that philosophers have discussed as a presentational symbolism, an ancient pre-verbal form of symbolism that's manifested in dreams, and that provides a basis for thinking analogically, and does so through an enhanced access to unconscious information processes. It also gives us access to those deep emotional processes that can also control biological responses. Shamanistic therapies have a variety of different kinds of mechanisms: the relaxation response, accessing the unconscious, leading to extinction of learned behavior patterns, giving us access to our visualization and mental imagery capacities, and releasing the opioid system and stimulating our serotonergic mechanisms. These shamanistic social healing processes rely upon community relations and social support, and involve a variety of ways of manipulating the psychology of the self through the spirit world. I think we should understand the spirit world not just in spiritual terms, but in terms of how it manages emotional dynamics and how it provides a tool for these symbolic physiological reactions, where belief transforms our emotions. The spirit world is a natural psychology. We can think of it as a neural gnostic structure, as archetypes, as the fundamental structures of understanding self, of others, where animals and animal powers reflect something about their innate psychic structures of human beings. And what shamanic practices provide are tools for manipulating these deep unconscious aspects of human nature. So the contemporary implications of shamanism is that they are part of the conceptual categories of our evolved psychology, as well as a representation of some of the structures of both addiction on the negative side and transcendence on the positive side. The alteration of consciousness is a natural and healthy process. It is one that is interrupted by soul loss due to trauma and abuse, and it's a set of tools in which we can recover these ancient aspects of ourselves through the concepts of animal powers that reinvigorate and reorient our emotional relationships to the world. So the biological structures of transcendence and addiction involve this capacity for producing adaptive cognitive states, integrating information that comes from the visions, and using the visions to change our psychological processes. The psychosocial dynamics of addiction involve our cultural loss of transcendent technologies. Today, our innate drive to alter consciousness is criminalized, pathologized, marginalized, and institutionalized. We lack the community integration that was provided by shamanistic rituals, contributing to dissociation and loss of emotional integrity. Indeed, we might see addiction as a loss of spirituality, individually and collectively, and pointing to the need for our identity transformation that reconnects us with powers beyond us. So shamanic treatment of addiction involves collective ritual activity, connecting with community, engaging in social integration processes that provide healing, utilizing technologies of self-transformation through drumming, dancing, chanting that enhance our self-awareness, engaging in rituals that push us to our limits, provoke a death and birth experience that allow for self-transformation, as well as the relaxation response and restful healing that comes at the end of these alterations of consciousness. And these processes are understood to restore the serotonergic balance in our body and to enhance the natural opioids that we all seek. So the shamanic journey into the unconscious and self, I think, begins with a death and rebirth that produces a self-transformation, that gives us an awareness of our own unconscious powers, that leads us normally and naturally into the animals that are within us in our paleo-mammalian and reptilian brains, and that give us a more grounded contact with these conceptual powers, animal spirits, that can be used to maintain ourselves or to do processes of self-healing. So we have an evolved psychology for altering consciousness, and modernization led to a loss of these community rituals. Indeed, I would contend that the phenomena of witchcraft that is found in cultures around the world was not what we were told it was, but rather the remnants of shamanic practices that were ruthlessly exterminated by patriarchal religions in the interest of centralized power. What we need to understand is that we lost access to these natural modifications of consciousness that are key to both sobriety on one hand and healthy transcendence on the other. These rituals are not merely rituals, as people are accustomed to saying today, but they are tools for normalizing our basic neurotransmitter systems, serotonin and dopamine. And beyond this, we have another significant and one might say central aspect of the shamanic practices, the sacred medicines, today often denigrated as hallucinogens or psychedelics, but which we can understand as some of the most central and important treatments for addictions today. And I will address this afternoon. So my comments here have been very brief. I've tried to outline the basic ideas that I've come to from a 25-year study of shamanic practices that I've elaborated upon in greater detail in this book on shamanism. Thank you for the opportunity to share my ideas.